Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I hope to take you to give you a slightly different view of cyberspace, a place which has touched all of us in most aspects of our lives. And I'd like to call this lecture Alice in Cyberland, Cybersecurity and the Individual, because just like Alice entered Wonderland, most of us entered cyberspace and found something we really did not expect. The story of cyberspace starts in 1990, just before Christmas, when Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who was at that stage a researcher at CERN in Switzerland, first developed the technology that made the World Wide Web a reality. He then, together with Robert Kaliu, created the world's first web server, and initially that was literally the world's first web server, so it was really important for them not to turn it off, because then we wouldn't have a World Wide Web. And they realized that this technology can really change the world, so they convinced their superiors at CERN that this technology should not be patented, but instead should be given away for free. And in 1993, they did precisely that, and they published the source code to the World Wide Web. In 1994, they did, however, start the World Wide Web Consortium in order to ensure that some form of standards stay in place. And the rest of the world followed them down the proverbial rabbit hole into cyberspace. Never before in the history of man has there been a technology that was adopted so fast. Within the first decade, we had close to 500 million people adopting cyberspace. Another 5 years later, cyberspace, or the citizens of cyberspace, ranked in the first billion, and thereafter this growth trend continued. Today it is quite a cramped place, and there's many, many people online. Worldwide, we're looking at 3.7 billion people using cyberspace on a regular basis, approximately half the world's population. Almost that many use it on mobile platforms, and it's still growing. Of particular importance or particular interest is the fact that the uptake in social networking in 2016 alone has increased by 21%. Africa, of course, unfortunately, primarily due to infrastructure problems, are behind the rest of the world in terms of cyber penetration. We have 29% of people online, but in South Africa, we are above the global average with approximately 52% of our population currently online. It's 28.66 million people. What's also very important to notice is 15 million of them use social networking. And if you look at the penetration on mobile phones, you will see there are more mobile phones connected to the internet in South Africa than there are people, substantially more, at 145%. So the question becomes, what do all these people do when they are online? How much time do they spend online? In South Africa, the average person spends about the entire working day connected to the internet in some or other way. And then they go home and spend an additional 3 hours on a mobile device. When you look at what they are doing, you will see that the average South African who's connected to the web spend close to 3 hours a day on social networks. Not just Facebook, but Facebook, WhatsApp, etc. If you multiply that by the 15 million people we have online, you have about 45 million hours that could have been used in a better way every day. 45 million hours people could have been reading to their kids. 45 million hours people could have been doing something to improve the communities, but we're posting pictures of kittens and sharing the latest video. In addition to that, we also watch approximately 2 hours a day of TV via the web. That doesn't count the TV we watch when we're not online. The web is a very, very busy place. And in a single minute online in 2017, quite a lot is happening. If you look at YouTube, 4.1 million YouTube videos are being watched every single minute. YouTube is enormous. The most watched YouTube video in the world is currently Despacito. It's been watched 3.55 billion times. If this was a record, it would have been platinum more than 12 million times already, which is kind of impressive. Number 17 on that list is the wheels on the bus. Anyone with a toddler will know why. If you want to watch everything that's on YouTube right now, you're going to need 875 million hours, or just more than 94,000 years to watch everything that's on YouTube right now. Amazon makes $258,000 worth of sales every minute. The Weather Channel, a lot of that via AccuWeather, gets 18 million requests for updates on the weather. It's kind of interesting. AccuWeather, by the way, every single time you do a request for a weather update, they sell your location information to third parties, and they're not even ashamed to admit it. Netflix, close to 70,000 hours of movies or TV shows are watched every minute worldwide. There's 45,000 odd Uber rides ordered, 3.6 million Google searches, and 100 million plus spam emails sent every single minute worldwide. Many of those contain malicious payloads. This means the web has become a place where a lot of money changes hands. Globally, 1.6 billion people engage in e-commerce in 2016 alone. $1.9 trillion was spent during 2016. In South Africa, we think it's not that much, but more than $2.3 billion were spent by South Africans online last year. More than half the people who's online in this country has actually ordered something via the web. Cybercrime definitely pays. PricewaterhouseCoopers' latest report shows that cybercrime is the 4th largest economic crime in South Africa, asset misappropriation, procurement, fraud, and bribery and corruption being the first 3. It's also increased quite dramatically from 26% to 32% in a single year. So, what does the cyber threat landscape look like worldwide? In 2016, it was quite an interesting year. We saw a large uptake in targeted attacks where people engage in so-called hacktivism. They would try to forward their own agenda via cyber attacks. The US elections were a very nice example of that, where the Democratic Party's information was stolen and then leaked to the press. There was also disk-wiping malware used against various targets in Ukraine, which led to a lot of power outages nationwide. Similar software were used in various attacks against Saudi Arabia. A lot of financial heists happened in 2016, and this was unusual because before 2016, the majority of cybercrime worldwide actually targeted the small guy. Tried to rob the customers of the bank and not so much the banks. In 2016, quite a lot happened. Many US banks were attacked by a hacker group known as Carbonac. The Bangladesh Central Bank was attacked. $81 million was stolen by a group calling themselves BandSwift, and they did this via exposing a weakness in the SWIFT credentials that's used between interbank communications. Similar attacks were launched by a group known as Odd Enough, and what's kind of interesting is if you look worldwide, major businesses suffered losses accumulating to over $3 billion over the past 3 years, primarily via spear phishing. Now, if you don't know what spear phishing is, all of us at some or other point receive a phishing email where people are trying to get you to click on a malicious link via some form of an email scam. Spear phishing is when I target the individual and I custom make that phishing email for you. I will sometimes steal some of your old emails and reply on them, or I will literally word it so that you believe that this is a person you should know and this is a link you should be clicking on. $3 billion stolen over 3 years. Another major trend is cyber attackers have stopped to write custom exploits. They now, in the past it took a very technical person to be a hacker, and they wrote exploits specifically for these attacks. They now live off the so-called land, and they target operating system vulnerabilities, off-the-shelf tools, cloud services, etc. Simple spear phishing was, by the way, also the culprit in the US elections, the attack on Hillary Clinton's campaign manager's Gmail account. And they often use social engineering to exploit macros within Microsoft Office and get people to run it to create backdoors for them. There was a massive resurgence of email as an attack channel in 2016. Worldwide, 1 out of every 131 emails is malicious. Now, if you take into account that there's 103 million spam messages per minute, it's approximately double that email in total. That is a lot of malicious emails floating out there. These are mostly driven by spam botnets for hire. Almost anyone can hire them. And the interesting thing is they all target the weakest link. They don't target vulnerabilities in the operating system. They primarily target the human, because irrespective of operating system vulnerabilities, if the human click on that link in the email, you only need to do it once for the system to be compromised. 2016 saw a massive rise in ransomware, and ransomware once again is very interesting in the sense that you don't require much to make it work. You need a malicious email, you need a strong encryption algorithm, and you need some untraceable cryptocurrency so that you can get paid and get away with the money. All of these are things which are kind of freely available right now. The Internet of Things also started to play a massive role in cybercrime. The Internet of Things is when we put all kinds of everyday appliances online. One of the most notable events in 2016 was the emergence of the so-called Mirai botnet, which is a very, very large Internet of Things driven botnet. And they mainly targeted cloud services, because cloud services depend on bandwidth to work. You can use a distributed denial of service attack to choke that bandwidth and basically make it impossible for an organization to do business. Very interesting. Brian Krebs, who's a very well-known cybersecurity researcher who's done a lot of work specifically into organized crime and looking at the role of the Russian mafia, etc., was attacked by the biggest cyber attack recorded yet. 665 gigabits per second distributed denial of service attack via this botnet. So obviously he was onto something interesting there. Many Internet of Things devices were compromised or shown to be compromisable in 2016. Barbie. Dolls with internet capabilities has been used to spy on children. Many cars, the Jeep Cherokee, for example, it was shown that it's fairly easy for a hacker to shut it down, even while you're busy driving it. The Hospira Life Care Pump is a device used in intensive care units to administer dosages of medicine. And it was shown that a person on the other side of the world can quite easily access this and administer a lethal dose, should they so wish. This week, more than 500,000 pacemakers were withdrawn because it was shown that there's a vulnerability in their firmware and a hacker can literally stop your heart if you have one of those. Same holds for insulin pumps, which is long known to be very easily hackable. In fact, many diabetics who have them hack their own in order to tailor-make their insulin regime for their own particular needs. And then there's the question about bigger things like warships. We all know about the incident quite recently when the USS John McCain ran into another ship. Now, I have no idea whether that was hacked, but what I do know is since 2015, the US Naval Academy has reintroduced celestial navigation into officers' syllabus specifically because they are worried about losing navigational capabilities in case of war, which is very, very interesting. If you put any device, a fridge, a hairdryer, I don't know why you want an internet-capable hairdryer, but you do get them. If you put any one of these devices online, in 2016, the average device was attacked once every 2 minutes. This is very, very scary. There was a lot of big data breaches and 1.1 billion identities were exposed. This usually includes username, password, quite often banking credentials, etc. There was a massive increase in the number of actual identities exposed in 2016. Malware is on the rise. There's quite or emails containing malware and bots is on the rise. There's, like I say, the number of malicious emails have increased from 244 in 2014 to 131. 1 in every 131 emails worldwide is malicious. There's also 357 million new malware variants. This is not individual malware apps. This is variants of malware that was discovered in 2016. It's kind of a busy space. Now, most of you have one of these, and very few people actually protect them. Some people like me have an iPhone, and they say an iPhone don't need to be protected. Other people have an Android device. They are all extremely vulnerable. 290 new iOS vulnerabilities were discovered last year, and 360 new Android ones, and every single one of those could actually potentially open a backdoor for an attacker. The web has remained more or less as unsafe as it's always been, and we have about 76% of all web applications worldwide are still vulnerable. What is good news is the amount of critical vulnerabilities has gone down. What is bad news is to reduce those 76% to almost nothing is not that difficult, provided the programmers simply are taught how to do it. It's not that the technology isn't that secure, it's that the humans who are supposed to code these things or configure them do not even do the very bare minimum, which is concerning. And then, of course, 2016 was known as the year of ransomware, because we had several very big attacks, and the availability of cryptocurrencies has made it easy for attackers to actually extort money out of almost everyone. Now, you would think that you have to be technically quite proficient in order to hack someone or to attack them with all of these things. You don't need to. You just need to be able to pay someone for these services. A ransomware toolkit can cost you $10 for a really cheap kind of budget version if you're not that serious about it. $1,800 if you want really good ransomware and you want to make a fortune out of it. Denial of service, you can buy an hour for $5 if it's a so-so one. For $20, you can get a really decent one. For about $200, I can pretty much shut down the entire Port Elizabeth for an hour or two. You just need the will and the finances. Passports, utility bills, etc. can all be bought online. Utility bills, by the way, for those of you who believe that this is something you can throw in the bin, anything like that has a market value, because these things all contain personal identifiable information that can be used when you are being attacked. Credit card information, anything from 50 cents to $30, depending on how fresh the stolen information is. How cybercrime has developed was shaped by many, many different events through the years. And I want to show you just a few of the bigger events that has shaped the landscape up until now, in order to show where we are going, or to give you my opinion on where we're going. Now, computer crime, or some of it, you can't even say it's crime, but malware started before the World Wide Web. The very first computer worm was launched in 1988 on the internet. That was before the web existed. If you didn't know, the internet's actually been around for very, very long. It was known as the Morris worm. It was written by a researcher who wanted to measure how large the web, or how large the internet was. At that stage, the internet consisted of approximately 60,000 servers. He managed to infect about 10% of the entire internet, but he had a bug in his code that allowed one machine to be infected multiple times, which means once a machine was infected, this infection would propagate inside the computer's memory and the server would fall over, and he just about brought the web to its knees the internet to its knees at that point. He's still around, he lectures at MIT, but he started the whole internet worm business. Another very well-known internet worm was in 2008, the Configure virus. I don't know if any of you remember it. It infected 9 million computers worldwide, including those in the Houses of Parliament, and it stole username, passwords, banking details, etc. And in 2010, Stuxnet is also a very notable one, but I'll talk about that just now. Second major trend that happened, or that's noteworthy, is the rise of cyber warfare. And it kind of started, the world started to pay notice to this the first time really in 2007, when Estonia was attacked, and it wasn't by a foreign country, it was actually by protesters from within Estonia. The Estonian government decided to move that statue of a Second World War Russian soldier to a less prominent place, and the Russian-speaking community in Estonia was strongly objected to this. They basically brought the country to its knees for several weeks. Utilities, major banks, government offices, etc., all lost access to the information resources. Stuxnet in 2010 was the first confirmed cyber warfare attack where a cyber weapon was used. It destroyed 1/5 of Iran's total number of nuclear centrifuges, which were used for the production of enriched uranium. It literally took over the managing software and simply spun that thing fast enough that it broke. South Korea was hit in 2013 by an attack which targeted many banks and the public broadcaster. A subsequent investigation couldn't prove who did it. Everyone suspects North Korea. But what they did find out is that North Korea has been training hackers in cyber warfare since 1986. And they have quite a large number of them because they are North Korea. NotPetya in 2017 was also part of the attack used in Ukraine. And I'll get back to that. There's been a couple of major undetected vulnerabilities which also had an impact on the cybersecurity landscape. In 2009, Google China was hacked, and a lot of intellectual property was stolen via that. And it turned out that the attack channel was Gmail accounts of these of various Chinese nationals, but what made these attacks possible was a vulnerability in Internet Explorer. And that vulnerability has been around for quite a long time, which basically shows how important it is to make sure that with whatever you use, if there is vulnerabilities, that you have them patched. 2014, they discovered Heartbleed. Now, Heartbleed was a major wake-up call for the security world because Heartbleed focused on a overrun vulnerability in the transport layer security of open secure sockets layer. Now, that is what all of us have been using when we communicated with our banks in order to do secure transactions. And the scary part was that we only discovered this critical vulnerability 2 years after everyone started using that specific version of OpenSSL, which is kind of important. Probably the largest trend in cybercrime has been massive breaches focusing on stealing user credentials. In 2008, Conficker stole 9 million people's credentials. It exploited the Windows vulnerability. In 2011, Sony PlayStation was hacked and 100 million users' credentials were stolen, including credit card information, etc. This was still what I would like to term a proper hack. They first used a massive distributed denial of service attack to weaken the defenses, and then they slipped through a couple of malicious emails. 2011, Epsilon was hacked. Now, for those of you who've never heard of Epsilon, it's because they're kind of behind the scenes, but they're the people responsible for most marketing emails you're going to receive in the world. 1,500 to 2,000 of the biggest brands worldwide pay them to send out the internet marketing. Epsilon sends out approximately 40 billion marketing messages every year. We don't know the exact size of the user database that was stolen, but it was rumored to be the biggest ever. It was also via a spear phishing attack. In 2015, 3 individuals, 2 Vietnamese and 1 Canadian national, was indicted and charged with making more than $2 million just out of spam they sent subsequent to that hack using the credentials they stole. 2013, the target group in America was hacked. 1/3 of all US adults were affected by this hack in the sense that their credit card information or banking details were stolen. Once again, the credentials were stolen via an interesting route. They used a spear phishing attack on one of their third-party providers, got credentials for someone who's part of the supply chain, and then logged into the bigger one. And this is a pattern that's starting to emerge everywhere in cybersecurity. People no longer care about targeting the technology. They primarily target the human. Sometimes you may think I have nothing to steal, but what you do have to steal is connections to other people who can be targeted. In 2014, eBay was hacked, or via stolen employee credentials, 140 million user accounts were compromised. We also saw the rise of hacktivism. In 2013, a very well-publicized case happened. Spamhaus is a company that basically protects other people from spam, and when they identify someone as a major source of spam, they blacklist them in order to prevent them from sending more spam. Spamhaus blacklisted Cyberbunker, a Dutch online firm who provided services to various people, and a lot of the Cyberbunker customers were not that happy with it, and they attacked Spamhaus with what at that stage was the single biggest denial of service attack ever. It was so massive that the entire world's internet was slowed down for a week or two. You might even remember it. In 2015, a fairly embarrassing one happened. Barack Obama made a speech about cybersecurity, and minutes later, the US Central Command Twitter account and YouTube channels were both hacked, and pro-ISIS messages were posted on it, which was rather embarrassing. And sometimes that's the aim of hacktivism. And in 2015, one of the best-known ones, on which myself and several colleagues have done a lot of interesting talks about how it happened, why it happened, what happened subsequent to it. Actually, Madison was hacked, and this was hacktivism because the hackers basically threatened, shut down this business where you're encouraging people to have extramarital affairs, or we're going to make it all public. And then they did make it all public. 37 million users' accounts details, including the actual emails that was sent around, was made public. Many people committed suicide subsequent to that. There were hundreds of people resigning, especially clergy. You know, it's kind of not frowned upon when the priest or the pastor had a Ashley Madison account. For me, one of the most noteworthy ones, and that's a very recent one, is Eternal Blue. Now, Eternal Blue is just one of a suite of tools that were stolen by a hacker group known as the Shadow Brokers. In April of this year, the Shadow Brokers hacked the National Security Agency cyber warfare unit. And they stole a whole bunch of cyber tools that was developed for cyber warfare, one of these being Eternal Blue. In May, the WannaCry ransomware attack was spread using Eternal Blue. The same underlying technology was used in the NotPetya attack against Ukraine. WannaCry infected 230,000 computers in 150 countries and was a very well-known ransomware attack. On average, they asked about $300 to unlock your account. What they didn't tell people is they didn't actually include the facility to trace it back to the user. So even if you paid, you couldn't unlock your account because they didn't really care. What's worrying is all of these other things that were bundled with it that was also stolen and released on hacking forums for free that has not been used in these massive attacks yet. They're still out there, and we are probably going to see them soon. So, a couple of reflections on major trends we have in cybercrime. First of all, there's two types of attacks. We have target attacks, and this is becoming very, very prevalent nowadays, where hackers will gather identifying information or personal information about a target. They'll build a little portfolio. They will normally use some form of spear phishing. So instead of trying to hack through your defenses, we send you an email and ask you to click on a link, and most users are gullible enough to do precisely that. It's normally a single victim. It's either a person or a company, and their goals are normally either somewhat political in nature, or they just want to make a lot of money. The second type of attack that's become really prevalent is the so-called random attacks. I don't really care who I hit. I believe in large turnover, small profit per person. We identify some exploit, we distribute it via normal phishing, it's not spear phishing, and we try to get as many victims as possible, but it's smaller payloads, $300 a shot, or, and this is a payload most people are unaware of, adding your personal computer or mobile device to a botnet. Quite often for a hacker, having you as part of their botnet is payback enough. You are not even aware of it, and at some point in future when they really need to attack someone else, they will use your computer or your device to assist in that attack. This is very, very popular. Currently, in many hotels in Europe, the appliances like the iron, etc., are all internet capable, coming from China. Many of those have a chip that automatically adds them to the hotel's free Wi-Fi, and when you log on in that hotel, your device is automatically infected with by the iron or whatever that's in your room. You become part of a botnet. So, what can we do? What should we do? Now, the truth is, there's too much we can do for me to deal with it in one single lecture without people starting throwing things at me. So I'm only going to focus on a few of the very important ones. First of all, it's really important to protect your own devices, your computer at home, your mobile phone, etc. And to do that, there's a few very basics you have to do. Number one, patch. Every single exploit that is published are almost immediately taken up by hackers, and they write custom exploits to attack that. If there's a security patch available and you haven't patched, you are vulnerable. I know it's really annoying and it uses up all your bandwidth when Windows 10 continuously updates itself, but it is kind of necessary. Number two, install anti-malware on your device as well. If you don't run anti-malware on your phone, you are just waiting for it to happen. Number three, install a firewall. If you don't know how, when you install Windows, you just click yes, 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 and it will be there. Very important, most of us have a Wi-Fi router at home. Do go and change those default login credentials. You know, change that password to something a little bit more better than just admin. The second thing we should all do is we should have decent passwords. Now, passwords is one of my pet hates. The average user has 27 discrete online logins. Okay, 27 discrete online logins, so there's these 27 passwords you need to remember. So what happens is people have 27 passwords that's all the same. When you compromised even once, anyone who knows your email address and that single password that was compromised can go try everywhere, and it's quite likely they're going to get in. 37% of users also forget a password once a week, yet people expect you to change it once every 60 days. Now, what's wrong with that is that's not science-based. The original criteria everyone else has based their password rules on has been discredited thoroughly. Bill Burr, who originally wrote it for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, had no access to any empirical data. He's never seen a password file in his life. He was told you need to come up with a policy for passwords. He did the best he could. He himself has admitted he made many mistakes, and what he came up with is something that's really difficult for humans to remember, but fairly easy for machines to crack. To give you an example from the well-known XKCD comic, if it's not well-known, you're not a nerd enough. Something like this, Troubadour 3 is what current password rules say you should be constructing, because it's got some capitals, some substitutions, numbers, punctuation, etc. When you look at that, it's got 28 bits of entropy, and even on a fairly slow link, it will only take 3 days for a dedicated attacker to crack that password. And it's extremely difficult for a human to remember. Something like this, 4 random words. Correct horse battery staple has 44 bits of entropy, and it will take more than 500 years for that same attack to crack, and it really is ridiculously easy to remember. Now you still sit with 27 passwords, so if you have 4-word passwords, that becomes too many. Now, in the past they said don't write it down. I disagree completely. You should be writing it down, but you should not be sticking it to your desk or to your keyboard. You should be writing it in a little black book and put it somewhere the hackers, other people can't find it. Or if you're lazy and you know you're going to lose that book, you get yourself a password manager like LastPass, where you can collate all of these things and you never have to remember a password again except for that one big 4-word password. My own password, by the way, has last been changed 4,680 days ago, 81 days today. I took a screenshot yesterday to prove it. Don't ask me why I'm not on that list that forced me to do it every 60 days. I have my reasons. The third thing you should be doing is you shouldn't be using free Wi-Fi. We all like free stuff. And when you're a South African traveling in Europe, free Wi-Fi is like manna from heaven. It is, however, extremely dangerous because the thing we use on our own computers to keep the criminals out is your firewall. But when we share a network, we're both behind the same firewall. So that's like locking your doors at night after you've invited the burglar in. If you do use free Wi-Fi, don't do anything sensitive. Don't do online banking. Don't log into Facebook. You may not think it's sensitive. It's very sensitive because everything I need to steal your identity and convince the bank that I'm you is in Facebook. Secure your own communications. How do you do that? You run a VPN. So if you just VPN into your NMMU account or your Mandela University account, you should be fine. If you don't do that or you don't have a work VPN, you can purchase one. It's fairly affordable. You can get one for about $5 or so. Don't use the free VPNs because many of them actually contain their own payloads. Turn off sharing with nearby devices, especially when you're on free Wi-Fi. It just makes it so much easier. And then if you're not using Wi-Fi, turn your Wi-Fi on your device off. Because once I've seen you log on to Mug and Bean Wi-Fi, I can set up my own hotspot, call it Mug and Bean Wi-Fi, and the next time you walk past, you automatically connect to mine, and I don't even have to do the effort of chasing you down to hack you. You just do it as you pass me. Beware of identity theft. Never click links in email. Your bank won't email you things to click. If it's something to click, whether it's a survey, don't click it. If you think it might really be your bank, then you go to your bank's actual website, you log into your account, but you don't click links in email. If your students submit things like that, you tell them, I really believe you're capable of hacking me, so please put it in, give it to me via Moodle. Never reply to spam, even if they do assure you that they really want to smuggle that much money out of Nigeria. I'm fairly sure they're not going to necessarily need your help. Don't overshare. Try to set your Facebook settings so that you don't overshare. And if you're in an environment where you need a big public Facebook profile where everyone else sees what you do, create a separate one for your family so that you can manage those profiles and maybe use a different email address, use a different password for Facebook than for everything else. Destroy important documents before you throw it away. And I know this is one of those things we all do. Look, here's my flight tickets. I'm getting on the plane now. We're going to Hawaii. Complete with the code, I can just scan, so I don't even have to do effort to hack you. I can scan myself right into your itinerary, and from there I can get access to almost everything else. Normally it's not a barcode like that. It's a little QR code, but I have tried it and it works quite well. Don't do it. And keep track of all your accounts. If you can, go to this place, have I been owned? And you spell owned with a P, because that's how the hackers do it, supposedly. It's something called lead speak, which is like, dates back from the 80s. I received the email from Have I Been Owned to say that on 28th of August 2017, so quite recently, one of my accounts have formed part of one of these massive hacks. My credentials have been compromised, and I went and have a look, and I see this is in fact so, and I changed that password, so I have no worries. Question is, how many of you have been compromised, but you don't know because you haven't bothered to look. So keep track of the accounts you have, do look, and don't trust all apps. Quite often, your app permissions will pop up, and most of us, you install something and you just click, okay, I just want to use this already. This week, Google withdrew more than 500 apps which were already in the Play Store that was found to contain malicious payloads. Do not give them any permission you are uncomfortable with. So, as a final reflection, in the case of cybercrime or cybersecurity, the problem really do exist between the keyboard and the chair. The problem is humans. It's not the technology. The problem is the human programmer who's not coding this thing according to the best practices. The problem is the human clicking on that email link. The problem is the human answering the phone and feeling sorry for the person on the other side and giving them more information than they should. And when you deal with humans, you have to realize that this is not a technology problem. Many years ago, information technology researchers were arguing that security is not an IT problem, it's a management problem. But that has changed quite a bit, and it's got a management aspect to it, and it's definitely got a legal aspect to it because we need legislation to catch these people. But for me, security really is a multidisciplinary pursuit where you need to know something about technology, you need to know something about education, because it's really humans need to be educated about how they should behave and why they should behave that way. But you also need a little bit of psychology, because knowing something and doing something is two very different things, and knowledge and behavior does not always go hand in hand. I thank you.